Hello, we're from Pomona High School, and we will be doing Before I Got My Eye Put Out by Emily Dickinson. Yes. Okay, so, there's a whole lot going in here. So, the title of the poem, Before I Got My Eye Put Out. So, immediately we're thinking, okay, this might be a little bit of a graphic poem, but there's some dark stuff going on in here.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but it's really weird, because throughout the whole thing, it's talking about different creatures and the beauty of the sky, just visions of what you could possibly see with your eyes, and it's actually a very beautiful, beautiful poem, which I thought is kind of ironic with the title. What do you think about the very first line, that it's just a repeat of the title?
Well, when I first read this poem, I tried to think of it as literally a blind person and their point of view on the world, but then I thought there was a lot more of like a spiritual quality to the poem. And like the word creatures is repeated in the first stanza and the last stanza, and I see that as kind of like a sense of envy, and can represent other people, and how they are spoiled that they have what she doesn't have. And I think just the repetition of the first line is just how they titled the poem because they found it somewhere.
Okay, so going off of creatures, what do you think the creatures are?
I think that it's humans and animals alike. I think that it's vague to be vague, so that way it's not just talking about animals and it's not just talking about humans. I think in this case, creatures is anything that has an eye in it.
That and no other way. So it's not, maybe that's kind of going off of the idea that this person is blind, because they know no other way. So these people they've always known sight. They've always known what is seen, and this could be taken from perspective. Maybe someone is not.
One thing that I noticed in the poem was the idea of before I got my eye put out, and the idea of maybe having the word I and the other I be the same thing. So what about that?
Yeah, I wrote it down, the same thing. The speaker is missing an eye, but she's both missing an eye and an eye, and I see it as that she's suggesting that in losing her eye, she's losing her soul.
And I would agree. I mean, several times she uses I. In the second stanza, that I might have the sky, for mine eye tell you that my heart, and several other occasions in the poem, and it's always I with a follow-up of an action, or a follow-up of a specific, like, visual or emotion. So that could be going off of, you can see this feeling, or it could be an inner intention, inner feeling.
And especially at the very end when it says where other creatures put their eyes and cautious of the sun, could have a deeper meaning, where instead of it being an eye like something you see with, it's your very soul, but you're just taking it for granted.
Which they could also do with their visual eyes as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's go for the second stanza, and but where it told me today. So this poem is set in the presence of the character, and that I might have the sky. How can you have the sky?
So I wrote down that Emily Dickinson in this poem, she has a connection between sight and owning, and if her sight were returned, she wouldn't just see the meadows and the mountains and the stars and the sky, but she would own them. And she says that I might have the sky for mine. So, yeah.
I would agree. It's kind of like a limitless possibility of the fact that your eyes own what you see, and so all this beautiful imagery we take for granted.
And I mean, and Emily Dickinson in poem says, "I tell you that my heart would split for sides of me." I think that's her talking about how having the entire sky is such a crazy perspective to her that she loves it a lot.
I think it's overwhelming.
Yeah, overwhelming. It's a good word for it.
I completely agree. Okay, so now the meadow's mine, the mountain's mine, just as we were talking about, is kind of taking ownership for that sight, all forests and stintless stars. Stintless stars. What do you think her reasoning was for putting stintless stars?
I don't know. I guess just the stars, as in the sky, and how people say like the sky is the limit.
Well, yeah, because stintless means unending, so unending stars.
Ooh, okay.
Yes.
Could it be that this is a metaphorical belief for that you could do anything? Please talk on that.
I agree, Drew. I think we should talk on that.
Oh, yes, I completely agree. Could it be that's a very, very possible thing. It could be not visual eyes and that of the soul and the bountiful possibility of things to do with that.
That's interesting though, because you're saying like limitless possibility to do something, but later on in that same stanza she says between my finite eyes, not infinite eyes. And so finite is a word of cutting off.
But maybe it's the point where she wants to be able to do everything and anything, but she is limited by the fact that she knows she can't.
Maybe her talking about her finite eyes are her actual eyes, but then when she talks about her infinite, that's when she's talking more about her soul.
Could be that very juxtaposition is what this poem is about. And then and not even just the visuals of landscapes and whatnot, but there's the motions of dipping birds, the morning's amber road, these beautiful, beautiful descriptions from mine to look at when I liked.
In that stanza, I saw the motions of the dipping birds as like going through the motions of life but not really getting anywhere. And then I saw the morning's amber road is like, when I see morning's amber, I think of like the sunrise and like how every day is a new day and a new start. And so that represents new, and then a road is like a new path. So,
because when I saw motions of the dipping birds, I thought of the ocean and birds that would dive into the water to get their food. So when I saw, and then motions, thinking of motion of the ocean.
Yeah, and I think Emily Dickinson does that on purpose because there's obviously a lot of different interpretations that can be taken from this, but just the idea that we can visualize this and that it's such a beautiful sight to think about. But imagine if you couldn't see that and how it's a very almost saddening feeling. The news would strike me dead for mine to look at when I like. So it's this kind of thing that she wants this vision back so much, and it's just it's the idea of how it would be to be blind. I think I safely agree with that. Okay, so safer guess with just my soul. Now we're getting into the actual idea of soul. Upon the window pane. Why window pane? We're talking about these beautiful landscapes, and then we're on windows.
So without sight, she sits inside her house and puts her soul at a vantage point. And I think it's similar to The Dead and that short story and stuff about how they're looking at the window, and that is what they can do is sit at the window, and they can look out at everything, but they can't reach it because there's something blocking them.
Eyes are often known as windows to the soul. Do you know this? Okay. Talk on that.
Well, when reading this poem, it does seem like the window pane is connected to the soul, since she just talks about the soul in the line above. So I think that in this case it could very easily mean that she's talking about the window to the soul.
We're down right after window pane is where other creatures put their eyes below the window pane, or above the window pane. So that could go back to the whole idea of eyes being windows to the soul, and maybe it's not talking about a juxtaposition between these two things, but how they're connected.
Can you explain on that?
Yeah.
Well, so we have all of these beautiful literal images, but they could also be figurative. figurative. Like you said, mornings amber rose. Each new morning, motions of the dipping birds is like challenges you can face, or actual like birds diving into the ocean. It's all of this like possibility for both life and the sights that come with it. And cautious of the sun. You were starting to talk on that, but
Yeah, I was starting to talk on that where it's possibly talking about the soul and how people take it for granted and they don't use and they don't enjoy it while they have it. And then there's also the idea of just having an eye and how, looking at the sun directly is a bad thing. So being cautious and just looking at the sun, but also taking your actual eyes for granted. So I think it's just both of them can be represented here about how you're taking your soul and you're taking your eyes for granted, and you should be really thankful to have them.
Thank you.